Serafina Voss had learned, very early, that a room could hold you without welcoming you. She stood at the edge of the great hall on the night of the ceremony, close enough to feel the heat of the fire pit, far enough that no one would accidentally brush her arm and feel the need to apologize. The hall smelled like pine smoke and roasted meat, and the kind of confidence that came from never having been told you were not enough. She had memorized that smell. She had never owned it. The girls near the fire wore their best. Vivienne Rath stood at the center of them, gold-haired and easy in the way that beautiful people sometimes were, as if the world had always been the correct temperature for her. She laughed at something, and the sound carried, and 3 other girls immediately laughed too, checking her face first to make sure they had timed it right. Serafina watched this and felt nothing she would name out loud. She was 17, half-blooded. Her mother had died 2 winters ago, and the pack had not mourned her, and Serafina had told herself that was fine, that was fine, that was fine, until it became a kind of rhythm she walked to. Caius Drenmore entered the hall and the temperature changed. Not because he was tall, though he was, not because he moved like someone who had never once considered what he looked like moving, though that was true. It was because he carried the kind of authority that does not announce itself and does not need to. The crowd split for him the way water splits, without being asked. He had been kind to her once, 3 years ago, beside the eastern fence, when she had dropped a jar of preserves and cut her palm on the glass, and stood there holding her own hand, not crying, because she had decided at 14 that she would not cry in places where people could see her. He had crouched down and picked up the pieces. He had wrapped her hand in the cloth from his own pocket without saying anything. Then he had walked away. She had been living on that one moment. The ceremony began. She told herself she was calm. She was so calm, she stood at the edge of the firelight and watched the alpha air approach the center of the hall, and she told herself it did not matter where his hand would point, because she had never expected it, because she was not foolish, because she understood her place in the order of things. His hand rose. It moved past her without pausing. It settled, steady and certain, on Vivienne Rath. The hall erupted. Sound, movement, congratulations folding over each other like waves. Serafina did not move. She thought, very precisely, about the grain of the wooden floor beneath her feet. She thought about how the boards were cut from the old cedar at the south ridge, how the cedar had grown crooked because the ridge got uneven sun. She thought about the cedar until she could breathe again. Then Caius looked at her. He did not look away. He held her gaze for one long moment, and his expression was not cruel, and that was the thing she would carry north with her for years. He said, clearly, so that the people nearest them could hear, "You were never going to be enough." Not angry, not unkind, the way you say a thing you believe to be true. The pack voted 3 hours later, 22 hands, all of them. She was given a canvas bag, a week of provisions, and the northern border. She did not cry until the trees swallowed the lights of the hall behind her. Then she stopped. She wiped her face on her sleeve and made a decision about herself that she would not revisit. She would not spend another tear on anyone who had not spent a single one on her. She kept walking. The North was not cruel the way people were cruel. It was indifferent, which was worse. The cold did not hate her. The frozen ground did not mock her. It simply existed, massive and patient, and it did not care at all whether she lived. The first month she survived on stubbornness, and the provisions, and a stubbornness underneath the stubbornness that she could not fully explain. The second month, she began to understand the patterns, which hollows held heat, which trees dropped branches in heavy wind, which sounds meant danger, and which sounds just meant darkness. The third month, she stopped being afraid of it. Something in her settled. She could not name it at the time. It felt like a room inside her that had always been locked, and the North had simply frozen the lock off. She moved differently. She thought differently. She stopped rehearsing conversations she would never have, and started paying attention to what was directly in front of her. That was when she found the iron remnant. Or they found her. She was never entirely sure. They were 12 people living in 3 structures that could generously be called buildings, deep in the ridge country, where the pines grew so thick that daylight arrived late and left early. Exiles. Half-bloods. a beta who had spoken against his alpha and lived to regret it. A woman named Petra who had refused a mate bond and been removed for it, who was now the best archer Serafina had ever seen, which she recognized immediately by the way Petra moved, like someone for whom the bow was not a weapon but a conversation. Their leader was a man named Aldrich, big, quiet, careful. He looked at Serafina for a long time the first night she arrived at their fire. "You have the look of someone who was told something wrong about themselves," he said. "Several people," she said, very confidently. He handed her a bowl of stew. That was the entirety of her initiation. She stayed. The years in the north passed the way honest things pass, without pretending to be short. She learned from Aldrich how to lead without filling the room with herself. She learned from Petra how to see what people were protecting before they said what they wanted. She learned from the ridge country itself that patience was not passivity, that waiting and watching and learning the shape of a thing was its own kind of action, and that people who mistook it for weakness were people you could beat. The Iron Remnant grew. Other exiles came. Word moved through the northern territories the way cold moved, along the ground, beneath notice, until suddenly everything was different. There was a pack in the north that did not throw people away. That was the whole of their reputation, and it was enough. By the time Serafina was 21, they were 43 wolves. By 23, they were 112. The night her wolf fully woke, not emerged, not surfaced, but woke, the way something wakes that has been pretending to sleep, was the night of the border siege. 3 rival wolves from the Western Territory had pushed across the ridgeline, testing, looking for softness. They did not find it. She did not know afterward how to describe what had happened to her in that fight. Not rage, something older than rage. Something the pack that had mocked her had been looking at for years without recognizing it, the way people sometimes stand in front of a very large thing and only see the part directly in front of them. The Iron Remnant saw it. They looked at her differently after that night. Not with fear, with recognition. The way you look at something when the name you already had for it stops being adequate. Aldrich stopped sitting at the head of the fire. He did not announce it. He did not make a speech. He simply moved 2 seats to her left and stayed there. The next morning, 3 allied packs sent representatives to the ridge. By the following week, 6 more had sent word. They did not come because she had performed strength for them. They came because she had simply been what she was, for long enough that it had become impossible not to notice. She became the Alpha Queen of the Northern Kingdom on a night that felt, from the inside, like nothing more than an ordinary night. There was no throne made of carved stone. There was no ceremony with candles. There was a fire, and her people around it, and the understanding, settled and quiet and absolute, that this was hers. She had not taken it. She had not seized it. She had simply grown into it, the way a tree grows into the space available to it, and now there was no separating her from the ground. She kept the canvas bag from her exile. She never explained why. She was 25 when the messenger arrived from the south. He was young, cold, and visibly unprepared for what he found at the northern seat. He had expected, she could see it in his face, something rougher. Something that matched the story the South told about the North, about exiles and the discarded. He had not expected the long haul with its clean lines, the organized patrols, the people who moved with purpose rather than desperation. He had certainly not expected her. She received him in the main hall and let him speak. The Drenmore pack was in trouble. A rival faction had been targeting supply lines for months. Alliances that had held for a generation were cracking. They were requesting a negotiation with the Northern Kingdom. They were, the messenger said carefully, requesting it urgently. She looked at him for a moment. "Who sends you?" she said. "Alpha Caius Drenmore," the messenger said. The hall was very quiet. "Tell him," she said, "that the Northern Kingdom does not negotiate through intermediaries. If the Drenmore pack wants a meeting, their Alpha attends." The messenger went south. A week later, Caius Drenmore rode in. She heard him arrive from 2 rooms away and spent those 2 minutes doing nothing differently than she had been doing. She was reviewing supply tallies. She finished reviewing the supply tallies. Then she walked to the main hall. He was exactly as she remembered. Broader, perhaps, at the shoulder. a small scar beneath his left eye that had not been there before. He stood in the center of her hall the way he stood in every room, as if gravity were a suggestion that applied to other people. Then he saw her, and he stopped walking. 3 seconds, maybe 4, his expression moved through something she did not have a name for, and she watched it move the way she watched weather now, with interest, without attachment. His delegation filed in around him, 20 wolves, all looking at her the way the messenger had looked at her, recalibrating. Seraphina, he said. Not Alpha, not Queen, her name, the girl's name. She felt 17 for exactly half a second. Then anger arrived, and she was genuinely glad to feel it, not because it was loud, but because it was hers, and it was familiar, and it steadied her hands the way cold water steadied her face in the mornings. She reached for it without apology. It was a tool she trusted. Alpha Drenmore, she said. She sat. She gestured at the seats across from her. His delegation sat. He sat last. The negotiation lasted 4 hours. She had studied the Drenmore situation for 3 days before he arrived, because that was how she did everything. She knew the edges of a thing before she touched the center of it. She knew which supply routes were recoverable and which were gone. She knew which of his fractured alliances were worth rebuilding, and which would fall again inside a season. She had written down exactly what the Northern Kingdom needed from the arrangement, and exactly what it was willing to offer. She laid this on the table in plain language, without theater. He listened without interrupting, which surprised her, and then she understood. He was not the 22-year-old who had stood in a hall full of people and said what he believed to be true about her. He had learned some things. Not everything, but some things. Midway through the 3rd hour, he said, "You built all of this." It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "In 4 years." 8, she said. The first 4 were foundation. He was quiet for a moment. "I was wrong about you." She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. "I need you to understand that I am not helping your pack because you have recognized that. I am helping your pack because this alliance benefits my people, and I govern with my head." She paused, not with the 17-year-old who stood at the edge of your great hall waiting to be chosen. She said it clearly, in front of all 20 members of his delegation. He did not look away. He did not argue. He accepted it the way you accept a thing that is simply accurate. The treaty was signed before the fire burned low. His delegation moved toward the doors in the organized shuffle of people, ready to be warm again. Caius stood, and for a moment he did not move toward the door with them. He looked at the hall, at its high beams, at the people moving through it, at the general sense of a place that worked, that held, that had been built out of almost nothing, by someone no one had expected anything from. He looked at her once more. She held his gaze. She did not give him more than that, because she had learned that some debts are not paid with softness. They are paid with the existence of the thing you became after. He left. She stood in her hall, her cold, hard-earned, impossible hall, and listened to the sound of his horses leaving the ridge. Around her, the Northern Kingdom continued its quiet, efficient life. Petra laughed at something near the east wall. 2 of the newer wolves were arguing cheerfully about the firewood rotation. Aldrich was reading in his usual chair, 2 seats to her left, and he looked up at her, as he always did when something significant had happened, with the expression of a man who knew better than to ask. She picked up the supply tallies she had set down. She finished reviewing them. The provisions bag from her exile hung on a peg by the far door, flat and empty and very old. She did not look at it. She did not need to. She knew, without looking, exactly what it had cost. And she knew, without saying, that every person in that hall had paid something similar. That was why it was hers. Not because she had been given it. Not because she had taken it from someone. Because she had found the people the world had discarded and said, simply, "Stay." And they had stayed. And they had built something the world had not expected from them, which was always the best kind of thing to build. She set down her pen. Outside, snow had begun to fall on the Northern Kingdom, steady and unhurried, covering everything equally: the Great Hall, the patrol paths, the ridge where the pines grew thick and slow and deep-rooted. It did not care who she had been. It only knew what she was now.